Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, including the stuff from Lost Origin, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, I'm going to be going over my Silver Tempest buy list. This is obviously different from our set review because I also look at cards and their potential in the future as well. So you may see some surprising stuff on the Core Essentials, as well as some of the more fringe cards as well that you may want to pick up if it's caught your eye. So let's start off with cards that I think are expected to be involved in tier 1 or 2 contenders currently or have obvious future potential. Let's start in the top left-hand side of the screen then with V-Guard Energy, certainly a decent card for Lugia players, for Arc Gudra, and possibly other Arceus builds. Also very reasonable in Blissey, so I like getting the 3 counts here. The 2 tablet cards seem very strong. The Earthen Tablet potentially being able to spread some damage, I think, is likely going into Urshifu, if anything, for a spread approach. So possibly just that one-off because you're already playing the Inteleon engine. Grove Tablet, I don't feel like you need more than 2 copies in Mew because the builds I've gone for in Mew so far find it hard to fit 2 alone, so I think making more space for them doesn't make too much sense, and I think that'll follow suit in the likes of the Vikavolt deck and whatnot. You probably won't go above the 2 copies. Camo Poncho I've not really put into many decks right now, but I do think there could possibly be a time for this sort of effect, as it does have a lot of strength behind it, and if you are someone that likes to play control strategies, it's one that's certainly worth the binder. Serena, a very, very strong supporter card. I think it's a 4 of in Lugia. It can sometimes be a 3 or 4 of in Arceus-based builds. It's the lead supporter, taking over boss's orders for a short period of time, at least, in a number of decks. So I really do think this is worth the full 4 count. Worker and Furisode Girl are both sort of like situational supporters. The Worker can sometimes help out against fighting that stadium war if you're like a Reggie deck or a Lost Box, that sort of thing. So it could add to your overall supporter count. Furisode Girl has a really interesting ability, but you don't really want to commit your deck to too many copies of this sort of card because it is still a niche effect, but has more of one of the more unique effects as a supporter, so it could be worth grabbing into the binder. The Lugia definitely the sort of flagship archetype from this set. I think it's already proving itself in Japan, and I think it's going to do the same thing over on our shores. So we are going for the thick line of the Lugia here, as well as 4 copies of Archeops. Let's not muck about. Let's just get this stuff into play. There's even an argument to going for the 4th Lugia V-Star, but I don't think it's mandatory in any one of these sorts of builds, unless you are going for a non-Aurora, like just attack with Lugia-based approach. So I think for the most part, you get away with the 4-3 line. Let's have a look at some other V-Star and V-Maxes then. The Drago, I think you can quite happily get 3 of each. I don't feel like the pure Regidrago deck is going to come on and do all that well because the Gardenia's Vigor and the engine that you have to play just isn't all that consistent, but I do still like Regidrago as a potential card alongside Arceus, and I don't think you'll ever need more than a 3-3 line there. The Regieleki 3-3 again seems pretty reasonable because you want this to be your bench sitter for Vikavolt and for Raikou, so it seems very reasonable there. And the Alolan Vulpix V-Star still is a little bit niche and fringe, but I think the card just covers just about enough for me to think that it could possibly go into Kyurem Palkia, because it gives you wall breaking, it becomes a headache for things that aren't playing Path of the Peak and have abilities of their own, and you have a V-Star power that can be an alternative to Palkia as well. So I feel like you'll never need more than a 2-2 line. This could again also be a card alongside Arceus. Maybe even Arc Intel could play a Vulpix package. So I think it's more than likely going to be a 1-1 count in certain lists, but I think a 2-2 is kind of the most safe you can get. Because I do think this card still has potential. There's just a lot of text that I like on the card. When you piece it together, you can find many spots for it to be a headache for a handful of matchups. Then let's have a look at some of the interesting one-prize stuff. Curlia could be the eventual successor to Cincino, especially because it has some interesting line toppers, like Gallades, for example. So picking up these definitely makes sense. They'll be cheap right now, and they may end up becoming much more playable later on. Jinx definitely has an annoying ability and can buy you potentially free turns here and there, and can be a nice finisher in 2-hit KO decks, especially if they play DTE or Twin Energy or something like that. Ariados, very cool. I've already played this in Lost Box, and I think it's a very reasonable include. Also, if you're a control player, possibly like a Zoroark control-y style box starts to come back. Even if it's just a 1-1 Ariados line, I feel like it could see a lot of value. So very strong card, but I don't think you need multiple copies because the effect doesn't stack. So yeah. Just one Raichu. I think it's actually a very strong card, specifically in Zoroark sort of toolboxes. Definitely helps out that sort of archetype. I don't think we're going to start running around with like a 3-2 line of Raichu anytime soon. I think you just have it as the bit part player in a Zoro toolbox, so just the one copy. And Radiant Alakazam, you'll never play more than one copy, so one's all you need. And then there's also the Ho-Oh V. I think there's not really many high-tier decks for Ho-Oh right now, I don't think, but this ability has a lot of potential behind it, especially when we have cards like Thornton, Energy Switch, stuff like that in format. So I think this is definitely one that you have in the binder for that future potential, because again, one of the more unique effects, a way to get a huge burst of energy into play relatively reliably with the amount of discard we have currently in format. So one that I'll keep my eye on and have in the binder, because it could be the face of a deck that we just don't know about yet, because this ability could be a great way to get a heap of energy going for other archetypes, potentially to springboard off of. Onto the Believer buy list then. These are cards that may prove themselves to be mid-tier contenders or have a good amount of potential going forward. Like I said, I think possibly the actual Dragon Drago deck is more of a mid-tier archetype than a top tier. So we're going to have the Dragonites in this bucket, as well as the Lance support if you really want to lean into some Dragon stuff. If you're a GLC player, pick up a Lance, I guess. The Arcanine, it's a decent enough card, but there's not really much payoff for all the work you put in for this Arcanine. Claydol could be interesting. It's energy acceleration from a one-prize Pokemon from the discard pile as well. So there's a lot to like here, but you are warping your deck in a pretty awkward way. Altaria, I was initially quite hype on this sort of card. The more I'm thinking about how lists are going to be adapting, the less I feel like the metagame is right for Altaria right now. But it does seem to be a card with still a strong, powerful effect that's worth at least keeping in mind for a few more sets. Gardevoir could go alongside the Curlier strategy. I don't even think this is necessarily the right card to go alongside your Curliers, because you're evolving like out of a trade from a trade. So the only thing it lets you do is like use the Curliers trade, then evolve, then trade again, all in the same turn. It gives you like a bit more tempo, I guess, but I would rather have different effects most of the time, in my opinion. Primordial Altar could be eventually a stadium card that we use once others rotate out, like Training Court potentially in like a Kiram style deck. But for now, I don't feel like it really does much for us. The Mawile V-Star has a nice gusting possibility, but it does have to attack itself a lot of the time or find pivot outs immediately after using the Star Rondo. At the moment, I think it's outclassed by Leafeon, but if we need Psychic type coverage, it could be a good one for the binder. Chestnut seems like a fun rogue deck that you can build towards if you really want to. Serena can offer some interesting healing. I think right now outclassed by Gardevoir, but as we go forward in the meta, the Serena probably ends up being the better card as we move into an EX era and Gardevoir gets less useful. Potentially healing could be the better outcome for you. Radiant Jirachi, pretty interesting card. You can start flipping some coins if you want to have fun on the ladder. I don't necessarily think it's going to be all that consistent, though, as like an attacking deck. But some control decks could even use this just as a thing to throw into the active position to give yourself combo pieces straight to your hand that's protected against Marnie. So that could be a pretty interesting option to have there. Kling Clang is a stage 2 deck, so I'm immediately suspicious, but that third gear can get you a lot of energy from the deck. And there's a couple more fringe Zorro toolbox style cards, essentially interesting stage 1s. The Medicham can hit for that key psychic weakness and can punish V Max Pokemon being in play, can attack for free. Which is very nice. Oh no, it can attack for free if it has 4 cards in hand, but hits more damage into a VMAX. And then the Domfan can deal reasonable fighting damage, but it requires you to play Fighting Energy, which is not something Zoroark particularly enjoys doing right now, and would still force a choice belt, so a little bit more on that fringe side. So that really is the Believer and core buy list. I think it's a bit of a small set to commit towards. For me, I'm definitely going to be leaning into Lugias. I'm personally interested in getting some Dragos to go alongside Arceus, because I feel Starbirth probably will still be useful in the format for a while longer. Also, really am eyeing up some of these nice one-prize Pokemon for future and such. So yeah, quite an easy set, not too many cards to go out of your way with. I'm certain that there's still a number of decks that are currently in format that are still viable, just with a few additions, the likes of Serena's, V-Guards, Grove Tablets. So if you are not looking to pick up one of the brand new decks in the set, you can still pretty much keep on trucking with a few little trainer upgrades, and that's all it takes. So let me know your thoughts down below of Silver Tempest. What are you going to be purchasing this set? What archetype are you hoping is going to be your new main deck? I'll hear it all down below. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in another video tomorrow. Cheers.